Rain hammered against the windows the night Lena decided to stay home alone. Her parents were away for the weekend, and she wanted nothing more than a quiet, peaceful evening with a blanket, hot cocoa, and a new horror audiobook. The house felt too big when she was alone, every creak echoing louder than usual, but she tried to ignore it as she settled onto the living room couch. It had barely been 20 minutes when she heard the first knock. Light, cautious, almost hesitant. She paused her audiobook and sat up straight. It was nearly midnight. No one should have been at the door. The knock came again. Still soft, still cautious, but undeniably deliberate. Lena stood slowly. Her mind raced. Should she check or pretend she hadn't heard it? The knock didn't sound urgent. It didn't sound like someone in trouble. Sounded like someone waiting. She tiptoed to the window beside the door and peeked through the blinds. No one. Her breath hitched. The porch light was on, illuminating the empty space clearly. She waited a few seconds, convincing herself it must have been the wind or something falling. Then the knock came again. This time louder. 2 firm taps like knuckles hitting wood. Lena stepped back from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed her phone and considered calling her parents, but they were hours away. The police. What would she say? That someone knocked and wasn't there. Silence filled the house again. Trying to distract herself, she returned to the couch, turned her audiobook back on, and wrapped herself in a blanket. Her breathing slowly steadied. The knocking came from the back door now. Lena froze. Her house had 2 entrances, one in front and one opening to the backyard. The backyard was fenced, meaning someone would have had to climb over to get there. Her hands trembled as she muted the audiobook. The back door was just a thin hallway away from the living room. She felt the cold draft immediately, as if something had disturbed the air. She swallowed and moved quietly down the hall. The knocking continued, steady, slower this time, like whoever or whatever was out there knew she was coming. She reached the kitchen. Her breathing was shallow, her footsteps silent on the tile. The back door had a small frosted glass window that blurred shapes and shadows but allowed light and movement to pass through. There it was. Silhouette. Someone, or something, was standing just on the other side of the door. It didn't move. Didn't shift. Didn't step back or lean forward. Simply stood there waiting. Lena nearly choked on her own breath as she ducked behind the counter. She reached for her phone with shaky fingers and dialed emergency services. The operator answered immediately. Before Lena could speak, something happened. The knocking stopped. Not gradually. Not slowing down. Just ended. She peeked over the counter. The silhouette was gone. The police told her to stay hidden until they arrived, and she clutched the phone like a lifeline. Minutes crawled by. The house felt unbearably quiet, the only sound her quick, shallow breaths. A step. Inside the house. Behind her. Low. Deliberate. Coming from the direction of the staircase. A horrible realization washed over her. The thing knocking. It wasn't trying to get in. It had already been inside. Lena bolted toward the front door, screaming into the phone. The operator tried to keep her calm, but panic controlled her legs. She yanked the door open just as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. She didn't look back. She ran barefoot into the rain-soaked street, her heart pounding louder than the storm. When the police arrived moments later, they searched the house. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. No evidence someone else had been inside. But Lena knew what she heard. She knew what she saw. The silhouette, the deliberate knocking, the footsteps inside. The officers assumed stress and imagination had gotten the better of her. But Lena never stayed alone again. And sometimes late at night, she swears she still hears it. Those soft, patient knocks. As if someone is still waiting for her to answer. The second story comes from a man named Rafiq, who grew up in a quiet neighborhood where every house looked perfectly normal on the outside, but hid secrets within. His parents traveled often for work, leaving him home alone more times than he liked. But he was 19, old enough to handle himself. Or so he thought. It was a cold Thursday night when the power went out. He had been watching a late-night cricket replay, half asleep on the couch, when the TV suddenly cut to black. The lights snapped off at the same time. The only sound left was the tick-tick-tick of the wall clock, now strangely amplified in the darkness. Rafik sighed and got up, thinking it was just another load-shedding issue. But something was wrong. The silence. It didn't feel normal. He grabbed his phone to use as a flashlight and began making his way to the kitchen, where the main breaker box was located. But as he passed the basement door, he heard it. Faint shuffling sound, like feet dragging slowly against concrete. Rafik froze. His family rarely used the basement. In fact, he couldn't even remember the last time anyone had stepped down there. The place was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten memories. The shuffling came again, louder this time. A long, dragging noise, followed by a soft thud. Rafik whispered to himself, "Probably a rat." But rats didn't move that slowly. And they definitely didn't sound that heavy. The noise stopped. He tried to ignore it and walked into the kitchen. He opened the breaker box and scanned it with his phone light. Before he could adjust anything, the basement door creaked open behind him. A thin line of darkness spilled into the kitchen. The air felt instantly colder, like the basement was breathing out a long, frozen sigh. Rafik turned, swallowing hard. The door was fully open now. Pitch black. He took one step toward it. A whisper came from the bottom of the stairs. "Help me!" Rafik stumbled back so hard he hit the counter. The voice was faint, broken, almost like a child's whisper mixed with static. But there were no children in the house. His thumb hovered over the call button on his phone, but the battery icon flashed red. 5% left. The voice came again. "Please, it's dark down here." Something was off. Something terribly wrong. Every instinct screamed at him to run out of the house. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Curiosity, or fear. Or the thought that someone actually might be trapped. Against his better judgment, he whispered back, "Who's there?" For a long moment there was silence. Then the voice changed, deepened, grew distorted. "You should have stayed upstairs." Rafik's heartbeat roared in his ears. Heavy footsteps charged up the basement stairs. Fast. Too fast. Rafik slammed the basement door shut and threw his weight against it. Something on the other side hit the door with tremendous force, rattling the frame. He fumbled for the lock with trembling hands, finally turning the bolt just as another crash shook the wood. Whatever was down there, it was strong. The pounding stopped abruptly. Silence. Rafik pressed his ear against the door, listening. Nothing. He stepped back slowly, his breath uneven. He didn't dare move. Didn't dare speak. Soft tapping. But it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the basement vents. A whisper seeped out through the metal grates. "I know you're alone." The power flickered back on at that exact moment. The kitchen lights glowed weakly, chasing away the darkness. Without thinking, Rafik grabbed his keys and ran out of the house. He didn't stop until he was outside, gasping for air under the streetlights. When he returned the next day with 2 friends for backup, they found the basement exactly how it had always been. Dusty but untouched. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. No one hiding. But there was one thing that didn't belong. On the concrete floor, written in long, dirty streaks across the dust, were the words, "Next time you won't get away." Rafik never stayed in that house alone again. And he never opened the basement door after dark. This story comes from a school teacher named Miriam, who lived alone in a quiet apartment complex on the edge of town. She enjoyed her solitude, grading papers at night, listening to soft music, sipping tea by the window. Her routine was peaceful, predictable. Until one winter evening when everything changed. The night began like any other. A cold wind rattled the windows as she settled into her cozy armchair with her laptop open. Snow was drifting lazily from the sky, blanketing the street below. The lamppost outside flickered every few seconds, struggling to stay alive through the storm. Around 11:30, Miriam stood to close the curtains when she noticed something strange. A figure stood outside on the sidewalk, perfectly still, facing her window. She blinked, thinking it might just be a trick of the shadows. But no, there was definitely someone there. A hood pulled low over their head. Their body was facing the building, but their head was tilted slightly upward, as if looking directly at her. A chill crawled up her spine. Her apartment was on the second floor. No one should have been able to see her from that angle unless they were deliberately watching. She stepped back slowly, her breath visible in the cold air of the room. After a few seconds, she forced herself to peek again, but the figure was gone. The sidewalk was empty. Trying to shake off the unease, she closed the curtains and returned to her chair. She told herself it was just someone walking by. Someone lingering for a moment. Nothing more. But the feeling didn't leave. It lingered like a cold hand on the back of her neck. An hour passed. She finished grading, washed her dishes, and got ready for bed. She tried to sleep, but the flickering lamppost outside cast moving shadows across her walls, making the room feel alive. Around 1:40 a.m., she heard the first tap on her window. Soft, deliberate tap. Like a fingertip touching the glass. Her blood ran cold. Her bedroom window was much higher off the ground. No one could reach it without a ladder. She froze under her blanket. Another tap. Then another. Slow, rhythmic, patient. Her heart pounded as she crawled out of bed and approached the window as quietly as she could. She lifted the curtain just an inch and peeked through. Nothing. Only the shaking branches of the tree outside. She backed away, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe the wind. Maybe ice forming and cracking. Then, from the living room. The window she had closed earlier was being tapped now. Soft, careful taps. 5 at a time. Miriam's body stiffened. There was no tree near that window. No branch. Nothing that could be making that sound. Her phone was in the other room. To get to it, she had to pass the living room window, the one being tapped. Summoning every ounce of courage, she picked up the flashlight from her nightstand and slowly walked toward the hall. The tapping stopped abruptly. She froze. Silence. She took another step. A shadow moved behind the curtain. Just a flicker. But she saw it. A tall shape shifting slightly, like someone leaning closer, pressing a face against the glass. Her throat tightened. She forced herself to move. She dashed into the living room, grabbed her phone, and backed away again. Her flashlight shook in her trembling hand as she aimed it at the curtain. The shadow behind it stretched wider, taller, as if rising. She dialed emergency services. Her voice barely audible. The operator tried to calm her, telling her to stay somewhere safe until help arrived. She retreated to her bedroom, locked the door, and crouched beside her bed. For a few moments nothing happened. Then she heard the sound that would haunt her forever. The slow, heavy sound of someone breathing against the living room window. Growling. Wet breaths fogging the glass. A faint chuckle followed. Low. Distorted. All the tapping stopped. All the breathing stopped. Everything went silent. When the police finally arrived 15 minutes later, they checked every window. There were no fingerprints. No footprints in the snow. No sign anyone had been there at all. Except for one thing. On the outside of the living room window, written in the condensation, was a sentence that hadn't been there before. "I'll come back when you're truly alone." Miriam moved out of the apartment the very next week. But sometimes, late at night in her new place, she hears tapping on the window. Only 3 taps. Always 3. As if reminding her that the shadow in the window still knows where to find her. This story is about Samir, a college student who had recently moved into his first apartment alone. It was a small, quiet place, the kind of space that felt safe, until late nights proved otherwise. Samir loved the peace and privacy, especially after months of sharing a crowded hostel room. But solitude has a way of exposing the unknown, and one night, that truth came knocking in the most terrifying way. Started just after midnight. Samir had just finished a late dinner and was scrolling through his phone while lounging on the sofa. He had been binge-watching a new thriller series, headphones on, completely immersed in the dark plotlines. Then his phone rang. A strange number. No country code, just a string of digits he didn't recognize. He frowned but answered anyway. "Hello." Silence. A faint static buzzed in his ear, almost like breathing, but slow. Deliberate. Deliberate enough to make him uneasy. "Hello. Who is this?" Click. Then a whisper. "I see you." Samir froze. The words were soft, almost melodic, but icy enough to make his blood turn cold. He laughed nervously, thinking it must be a prank. "Very funny. Who is this?" No reply. Just breathing. But now, it sounded closer. He lifted his phone away from his ear. The breathing was in his room. Samir's heart thumped so loudly he thought it might have drowned out the sound of his own thoughts. He got up, trying to convince himself it was just a prank, maybe a neighbor dialing the wrong number. He stepped toward the bedroom door. The phone rang again. Same unknown number. He ignored it. He couldn't risk answering again. But the calls didn't stop. Every 5 minutes, shrill, relentless. By 2 a.m., Samir could no longer ignore it. Something felt wrong, off in a way that went beyond mere prank calls. He decided to answer once more, just to threaten whoever it was. He picked up. "Listen, And the whisper came again, this time clear. "Turn around." Samir's stomach dropped. He slowly turned toward the hallway, empty. Just the soft glow of his night lamp and the shadows stretching along the walls. "Is someone there?" "Stop messing with me." The whisper shifted. Now it was coming from inside the apartment, from behind him. He spun around. Nothing. He ran to the door, yanked it open, and rushed down the stairwell. When he reached the lobby, the building was quiet. Dead quiet. Not a soul in sight. Relieved, he called the police from the street. They arrived quickly, checking his apartment. The doors were locked. No windows broken. Nothing inside was disturbed. "Probably a technical glitch," one officer said. "Your number might have been spoofed. Happens sometimes." But Samir knew better. He could feel it. The presence had been there, watching him. Breathing. Waiting. That night, he slept at a friend's place. The next morning, he returned to his apartment, determined to convince himself it had been nothing. He walked in and froze. On his phone, a new message had appeared, though he hadn't touched it. "Alone again. Perfect." Samir never stayed home alone after that. And late at night, whenever his phone buzzed, even with a known number, he would flinch, wondering if the whisper had returned. Because some things, he realized, don't need a face to haunt you. And some calls never stop. The final story is perhaps the darkest of all, and it comes from a young woman named Aisha. She had just moved into a new apartment on the top floor of a quiet building. The place was small but modern, with a beautiful view of the city lights. She loved the independence, the solitude, the ability to live on her own terms. But one weekend, she discovered that being alone at night could be far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. It began on a Friday evening. Aisha had just returned from work and decided to treat herself to a quiet night in. She ordered dinner, lit a few candles, and settled on her sofa with a new novel. The apartment felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. Around 10:30 p.m. she heard it, a faint creak from the kitchen. First she dismissed it. The building was old, floors creaked. Appliances hummed. But the creak came again, louder this time. Slowly, cautiously, she rose to investigate. The kitchen was empty. Everything was in its place. She checked the windows, they were locked tight. Aisha shrugged and tried to relax. Maybe it was her imagination. She returned to the sofa and opened her book. An hour later she heard it again. Not a creak this time. A soft, almost deliberate footstep on the tile floor. Her heart raced. She told herself it had to be a neighbor. Maybe someone had come in through a shared hallway. But the building's security was strict, and she had locked her door when she came in. Then came the whisper. From the living room corner, soft, almost inaudible. Aisha! Her blood ran cold. She froze, staring at the shadows. The room was empty. She tried calling her friends, but her phone refused to ring out. No signal. She considered running to the lobby, but the front door was unusually heavy, almost resisting her push. Felt wrong. And then she saw it. A figure in the corner, half hidden in shadow. She blinked and it was gone. Aisha's instincts screamed at her to leave. She grabbed a kitchen knife, clutching it tightly, and moved slowly toward the hallway. The lights flickered. She froze again. In the reflection of the mirror across the hallway, she saw someone standing behind her. A tall, dark figure with no discernible face. Just a shadow. Her scream caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward. But she felt it. Its presence pressed against her, like a weight on her chest, suffocating her. Aisha turned to strike, but the figure had vanished. The room was empty, yet she could feel the air moving. Hear a faint whisper echoing in her ears. "You can't leave." Her mind raced. She ran to the door, yanking it open. The hallway was empty. The building was quiet. Everything looked normal. She thought she was safe, until she reached the street. A shadow fell across the sidewalk ahead of her. Slow, deliberate. It moved in sync with her steps. Every time she stopped, it paused. Every time she turned, it stayed just out of view. Aisha ran, heart hammering, never looking back. She called her best friend, begged to stay at her place that night. When she returned to her apartment the next morning, the place appeared untouched. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing to suggest anyone had been inside. But on her living room wall, smeared across the white paint in a thin black streak, were the words, "I'm already here." Aisha packed her things that day. She never spent another night alone in that apartment. Even now, she avoids being home by herself. Because sometimes, some things don't need permission to enter your life. And some guests never leave.